Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're talking about midlife crises.
Oh,
Are they
midlife crises.
having one? Do they last like for a day or a decade?
I think it
Can you have more than
depends.
one? I think it depends. What do you do about them? Are our midlife crises different from men's midlife crises? I have thoughts, I have studies,
I'm
and we
going to
have
say
listener
yes.
advice.
I think we should start by defining midlife because I remember my mother getting very annoyed with me when I was referring to myself as middle-aged when I was 40 because she was like, you are not middle-aged, because it bothered her that she had a middle-aged third child. And I'm like, I think 40 is middle age, though. 45, you're living to 90. 50, you're living to 100. I think we're in middle age.
Yes, yes. So midlife, I looked at that. It's sort of broadly defined as 40 to 60, the area, the
I think
era
that
of
makes
midlife.
sense.
A little
Although,
generous.
again, another thing that I want to discuss about this is how midlife has changed so radically. I was just listening to a podcast about whether or not there should be forced retirement. And, should there be an age where people have to stop doing their jobs, which is becoming more and more relevant as our presidents are getting over
Right,
80 generally.
right.
And one of the hosts was saying that their grandfather was forced to retire from like IBM or one of those big companies that you went to work with at 20. At guess what age?
Like 48, something like that.
55, but
Okay,
still really young.
Age means something a lot different than it used to. I actually have some research on this for
That's
you.
what's crazy. Like forced retirement at 55 blew my
Right,
mind.
right.
That seems to me, as a person not too far from that number, like, whoa.
And of course,
Like
there
you
are
would
no
just start be expected to be like going on cruises and playing golf for the rest of your life at 55.
Yes. Yeah. So there's this guy, Howard Chudacoff. He's a historian. I'll put the link in the show notes. He wrote this whole book about how the way we experience age completely changed in the 20th century. He argues, like post World War II, that at the beginning of the 20th century, say like, if you were 40 years old in 1910, both your parents were definitely long gone. You might have had another 20 years ahead of you. Somebody else might have 40 years. Somebody else might be dead already, but like pretty much you're in a very different phase. And then somehow rapidly in the post-World War II era, we turned into if you're 40, like of course both your parents are around. You feel like you have decades of life left. If you're lucky, you're not like on the wind down at 55 to the graveyard. And that completely changed things. And then
because it's not totally somehow, because it's also antibiotics. Like that's so much of it, right?
Like longevity.
It's just the basic, like very baseline, what we think of now as like medical treatments were totally revolutionary, right?
Right. And so he said, so having that sort of runway completely open up in a different way, this Howard Chudacoff argues, means that all of a sudden numbers and age and how old you are became newly important, like in the 1950s and ever since. And he points to things like, this blew my mind, Hallmark cards. Like before then, there wasn't a like happy 10th birthday. Oh, Lordy, you're 40. Like, look who's nifty in 50s. Like that was a new thing in like the 50s and the 60s and 70s. That all of a sudden you kind of thought about or cared about how old you were. Was your 5-year-old in kindergarten or were they in first grade? Like we never thought about that before. And all of a sudden how old you were and what you were supposed to be doing by certain ages, i.e. getting married by 30, having a kid by 35, whatever.
Getting married by 30 is showing your age that like,
yeah,
it was used to be getting married by 18.
Right.
My mom got married at 32 or 33. And I mean, hilariously, like she had letters from people being like, well, you've chosen to live alone. Like the idea that you would get married at 32, and this was in 1968 that she got married. It's not, oldie timey days. I mean, it is, but it isn't. And my grandmother had gotten married, at
Mine
30.
too, in
And I
her
mean,
30s, right.
the idea, I'm watching Sandington. Have you watched it on PBS?
No.
It's kind of a delicious, like if you like, what's the one that Downton?
Bridgerton?
I was going to say, what's the one that happens at Downton Abbey? It's called Downton Abbey. It's that vibe, you know.
Okay,
it's
all right.
it's you know, oh, we can't be together, but we must be together. It's a romance set in the oldie timies, but the spinster on the show is 7 and 20. You know, she's 27 years old.
I played a part. Joan Crawford. There's a movie called The Best of Everything. It's based on a great novel, and I did the play in New York City. Anyway, I played the Joan Crawford role. She played it in the movie, and the book is all about how this older woman in the office who always wears a hat, she's sort of the boss. Nobody wants to end up like her. Like all the girls in the typing pool laugh at her behind her back. Who wants to end up like her? She's 33. They find out because they steal her driver's license once, and they laugh at her in the whole book. And the author has pretty much the same point of view, but like, wow, at least
Poor
I'm not old
her.
like her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I was thinking, laughing when you said, Amy presented this topic to me, to my delight. But when you said midlife crisis, I really thought, you know, what's funny is I was pregnant at 41. I was having a baby at 41. We started our business when I was in my mid to late 40s.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm going to have a midlife crisis when I'm like 76 because I'm doing everything so late, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, but things have changed. You know, my dad is 88 and he is still taking contract work. He's 88, you know?
He's living independently, right?
If
He's doing
Joe
his life.
Biden gets elected president, he will be president until he's 86 years old. Like,
Yeah.
it is a different time. I mean, we're doing different things. I do think for men, it's different than women. I did laugh at my dad because I was like, I don't think a lot of people are calling 88-year-old women for contract work. I don't think that's ever happening. Like, I
That's
think
right.
an 88-year-old
Well, they-
woman and an 88-year-old man are very different. But, and it's unusual.
But I was gonna say, are there 88-year-old female lawyers? There are probably like 10 of them in the world. Like things were different then.
Yeah, and I
When you're
think it's
88,
been
it'll be
interesting
different.
around this debate about Dianne Feinstein, who's having,
Mhm.
you know, terrible health problems, and people are pushing her to retire, saying that her aides are doing a lot of work, that some people are pushing back and being like, I think there's men who've been like wheeled in by like, you know, their
Yeah.
23-year-old wife who was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
casting the vote. Like, but it is, yeah, I think old men and old women are different.
Well, so midlife crisis, 1965 was when that term was coined. Social
Okay.
scientist, his name was Elliot Jacques, and he said he was going to study how and why men and women around the age of 40 became disillusioned with work, disenchanted with relationships, and detached from family responsibilities. But as so often happens, his work, his reflections, and the things that came after it tended to regard, I'm quoting here, the male life force as the human norm. And so accounts of midlife crisis were usually framed as a masculine phenomenon. Like the 7-year itch, like I want to have an affair because my wife bores me. I want to drive a fast car. I want to look younger. Like
Yes.
these are sort of masculine, like I want to express my virility.
Yes.
And that female midlife crises, of course, exist, but they're different, but they haven't been sort of existed.
Are they
or-
more like existential? Like, what's it all about?
They're more, well, somebody has argued, let me see if I can find her name. It's been argued that women's midlife crises, to the extent that they exist, and certainly I would say as expressed on our Facebook page, which is where this conversation really started, which inspired me,
I'm so intrigued. I truly have no idea what you're going to say.
women's midlife crises involve the family, the home, kids leaving, they're changing roles in terms of the people that they love and take care of. They express that as central, or at least part of the crisis that they're having more often than men do, or at least they have until now.
So interesting. I
Right.
think I'm throwing off the curve a little bit because, again, I have a child in elementary school
Right.
and I am old. You know, it's just funny to me that like kids leaving home feels very far off to me still.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not normal because I will be in my 60s and I will still have a high schooler.
Yeah. Well, lucky you, I guess.
You could argue it both ways, Amy. Let's be very, very honest.
So you take me to the next point, which is sort of how old are we when we have a midlife crisis? So
Yes.
let me go back to, because we haven't given a proper shout out. This was a listener on our Facebook page.
Great. Shout it out.
She brought this topic. I'll link to it in the show notes. And she said, "Who has been through the midlife crisis and how did you deal? I'm turning 40 next week and I feel like I've wasted my life. How can I get over the what ifs?" We have advice. Advice is coming. And I read that, and of course my reaction is like, 40, like, kid, like, slow your roll.
Listen, kid. You like took out your Camel cigarettes.
Right,
and you're
right.
Like, listen up, kiddo.
Right. But that's not fair or appropriate.
Nope.
And I remember as I approached 30, and then also 40. Like, have I done what I'm supposed to be doing by this point? What do I have to show for myself? What do I have behind me versus what do I have before me? And is it enough? I think that it's normal to have that existential crisis, and 40th birthday is one opportunity where that can happen.
I feel like I have the reverse of that, which is I feel like I'm always like, do I have enough runway left?
Right.
Like, am I getting, like, I got married at 36 and I was like, do I have enough runway left to fit in kids? Like, do I have enough runway left to fit in a second career? Like, do I have enough runway left to get the things done I want to do? And I feel like I see the runway shortening more than I look back and see not enough.
What is it all meant? Right.
Yeah, I'm not as much not what is it all meant as like I feel like I'm always playing chicken with life. Like I met a guy when I was 35 and got married and had 3 kids. Like that's pretty lucky,
It's pretty good.
I smushed it in right at the end.
So here's 3 ways that Elliot Jacques, the pointer of midlife crisis, says that it can play out, that it can appear. And again, this seems to have played out with the people on our Facebook page. It's compulsive attempts to remain young. Okay, yes, and particularly hard for women, and particularly assigned to women, wouldn't you say?
Well, I mean, it really is getting insane. Like the arms race of staying young is, I do think that we talk about this with my mom's mom and her sister. Like they didn't even really have hair dye or weren't that interested in it. Like they definitely just committed to like a gray curly perm in their 50s.
Yes.
And then they looked that way forever. They look like little old ladies, probably from late 50s to death, right?
Yes.
Like they had the same gray permed hairstyle and like floral house coat. It was like, I'm hanging it up. And both of their husbands were also dead by then. I mean, it's like they were like little old widow ladies by the time they were in their 50s. And then like my grandma was like literally J-Lo's age when she committed to the gray perm and the house coat.
Yep.
You know what I mean? My grandma was beautiful. She didn't walk around in a house coat. I'm not trying to like goof on her at all. But the idea that like, I don't know, is J-Lo 54 or something? And she's like on the cover of like bikini magazines with like long flowing hair.
Yes.
She looks like a 16-year-old. It's absurd. It's an arms race.
0 original parts at this point. Like we have access to things. J-Lo like takes human growth hormone and she's had like 75 plastic surgeries. So there's things that weren't available to our mothers and grandmothers in terms of looking younger. And I think that was a freedom in a way. Like
a huge
right?
freedom. Huge freedom.
I think about when I was growing up, the moms at the like town pool kind of thing would all be wearing like those skirted bathing suits that everybody wore in the 80s. And that moms were in the 80s. And I look back like, yeah, like they were 38 and they were just, oh, well, I guess I'm done with that. And I'm sure they had midlife crises of their own, but there was just something about like you weren't even supposed to keep trying. So it was okay.
Well, like downside, hang it up. You're 40 and you're done. Like
right.
Your husband's going to have a heart attack soon and it's over.
Right.
That's a downside, considering that I was like just starting a family at 40.
Yep.
But like upside, you were not expected to be like in a pleather bikini at the pool when you were 50 years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a mixed bag, Amy, a mixed bag.
All right. So compulsive attempts to remain young. And this kind of goes with it. The hypochondriacal concern over health and appearance. I mean, appearance, but then also health. Yes. I mean, I see
And I don't like the word hypochondriacal there. I think that, like, I was saying to somebody the other day that, like, after 45, let's say, the weird pain may kill you. Like, it's definitely a time of your life where, like, yeah, you can be a hypochondriac about it, but also realistically, like, it's happened now. Like, someone you know has died, right, of a strange young illness.
Right, or has had that thing that turned out to be a thing.
That's the thing. It turned out to be a thing that happened to be a thing. Like, I don't think I consider myself not very hypochondriacal or whatever the word is, but I do recognize that, like, the weird pain thing might be the thing. You know, when I have this week, I was having a weird, like, chest pain problem, and I'm sure it was like gas or something was bothering me. It was nothing. But I'm like, it could be the thing. This could be the thing where you go in with the weird pain. It could always be the thing now.
Get your tests, get your, mammograms and your colonoscopies. We're definitely not saying not to do those things. I do those things. But I don't spend time worrying about what if there's something wrong.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a ridiculous worry either. Because, like, it could be. That weird pain, it now could be. It's not that likely to kill you when you're 25. And I think you can J-Lo deny your age all you like. And God bless J-Lo. I'm not coming for her. I think she looks amazing. God bless her. She's working hard. But you can't actually deny the fact that you are older.
Even J-Lo is in a futile race against time.
Sorry, J-Lo. We love you.
About it. All right, there's one more.
But you're dropping hot
way
beats while you're doing it.
There's one more way a midlife crisis manifests. I'll tell you what it is when we get back. Okay, so midlife crisis. I mean, some of us are soaking in it. It's you get you start trying to look younger. You start worrying about the time you have left and your health, and you have this existential thing about what it all means. And the last thing, this is Elliot Jacques who sort of defined the term, so we can agree with him or not. But this is what he said: you develop a hollowness and a lack of genuine enjoyment of life.
No, disagree.
I think that's what this listener was saying when she's like, I'm turning 40 and I just have this
It's
like,
over.
What have I done? Not even it's over, just like I what have I done? And I'll quote Valerie who agreed with this listener, and she said, I don't feel sad exactly. I just feel blah. Everything in my life feels like an obligation.
Oh, interesting.
What he's getting at. And this doesn't last forever, but people are in it, and I identify with having had these feelings.
For sure. I mean, definitely, like, I have a lot of youngs in my life right now, whether my nieces or nephews or even, my sisters-in-law are still on the young side of young. And it's definitely, like, I go into New York City now. I live in the burbs. But whenever I go into the city, I'm like, youth. It was so great. Like, just going to a bar, you don't know who you're going to meet. You might kiss somebody. You might meet a cute bartender. Like, the phone could ring and, like, you could still win the Oscar, like, it could still happen. Like, that screenplay I'm writing, like,
right.
I might still marry George Clooney when I'm 25, like, back when I was 25. He's taken, ladies. But you know what I mean? Like, the world is endless possibilities, which is so exciting and fun.
Right.
And I do feel like I delayed as long as possible. Like, I didn't want to get married at 24. I loved the infinite possible. I loved it. And I do miss the infinite possible.
That's exactly what it is. And then when you're turning 40, like, why didn't I go to law school? What if I married person B instead of person A? What if we never left the city? What if we, hadn't stayed in the city? Like, right? What if I had gone back to college? Like, all these things.
Yep.
You're locked down. That's what it is.
Yeah,
like,
the infinite possible is definitely gone, and you don't really know when it's coming. Like, you don't know the last day you're ever going to look good in a bikini. Like, you don't know it. It just comes and goes. People say that about kids all the time. Like, you never know the last day you'll pick them up. And I'm like, it's fine. They get heavy.
But it is true. Right. You don't know. Right.
But yes, like, it is definitely like if you stay married, you're done kissing hot Irish bartenders. It does stink. Like, and it definitely stinks for my husband too. Like, but I definitely found that phase of life. I loved being in the infinite possible, but I don't miss the anxiety of the infinite possible. And so I think you have to be somewhat realistic about like the infinite possible. I had horrible anxiety attacks when I was in the infinite possible because I was like, I could marry George Clooney upside. I could miss the boat and never find someone and not have kids. Scary. Like the scary. I'm glad to be done with the scary, I guess.
Well, I hate to tell you, but I think you might have a scary part ahead of you. And I wonder if some of our listeners who are younger than us are in this developmental phase. We talked about this on a recent episode, and I brought up that Laurence Steinberg wrote this book called Crossing Paths. And he suggested, because he was studying like midlife crises in men and women, and he suggests that it's triggered not by your own age, but by your kid's developmental age. This is obviously for parents, not for non-parents. That he could predict whether somebody was having feelings of midlife crisis. He didn't call it that, but their crisis of confidence, their unhappiness. He could predict whether somebody was in that phase by asking her how old her kids were.
Oh,
and if her
tell
kids
me more. I want to understand that more.
Okay, so he said, regardless, I'll give you a long quote because it's worthwhile. He says, our children act as yardsticks for our assessments of ourselves. And that regardless of the quality of the relationship, he says, parents' mental health worsens when their firstborn child moves from childhood into adolescence. During this transition, parents' self-esteem declines significantly. We could not predict this turn for the worse simply by knowing the parent's chronological age. The drop in self-esteem is not tied to turning 40 or to any specific age for that matter. If that were true, we would see, similar patterns. Everybody turns 40 and there's a drop in happiness. But he didn't. He said, rather, we found we were much better able to predict what an adult was going through psychologically by looking at her child's development than by knowing that adult's age.
That makes sense.
So he argues in this book, we talked about it with the empty nest. I said to you that what really stuck with me is it's the emptying nest that's the moment of crisis, particularly for the primary parent, who is the mother in my case, that your child, like getting ready for your child to leave home feels huge when it's ahead of you, or your 40th birthday feels huge when it's ahead of you. And then as soon as it's passed, you're like, oh, it's actually like, it's fine. I'm still here and things are a little different, but that's okay. That it's in the empty nest is actually peaceful and kind of great, but the emptying nest is very stressful.
For sure.
And I've seen that in women that I know. It's like my youngest is about to go to college. My youngest is about to leave the house. Like, now what? And you were saying like it's infinite possibility. Like when we were 24, infinite possibility was exciting and scary. And now you're 44 and it's infinite possibility and it's exciting and scary, right? I can do anything at all. I could go back to school if I wanted to. And instead of feeling happy and excited about that, it can kind of freak us out.
And I do think that it's a little bit different. I have 2 other jobs outside of raising my kids. When my kids were little, I had one job. I was this stay-at-home mom, basically. I wrote a little bit freelance, but barely.
Right.
And I do think that is a point of my life where I was riding the wave of the kids. Like if we had a good day, we all had a good day. If we had a bad day, we all had a bad day. And I think that for being in a situation where you are completely, I want to think of how to say this. Hold on a second. Being in a situation where you are staying home with kids. And like, I know for myself right now that my home life to a certain degree is the least fulfilling part of my life because my kids are tweens and teens and they've kind of turned on me. Like they think I'm cringe. They're over it. I am not doing any of their activities because I'm not a fan of middle school activities because middle schoolers are mean and smelly and I don't want to be around them. Like the enjoyment that I used to take from being at home and like a lot of hugging, a lot of mommy, a lot of work. I mean, one of my kids has truly, it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This kid was like, the sun only rose when I said it did. I was the hero of the household. And now it's truly like, I'm completely disgusted by the lameness that is you and all you embody. And we used to have discussions when this kid was little because this kid and I were just like besties.
Right.
I'm like, I can't imagine. That'll never happen. Thank God it did. It's developmentally appropriate.
That's right.
But I do think that if I wasn't working right now, I would be in a period of real distress because, like, you know, my husband and I, we get along great. We have a great relationship, but like, it's not full of romance and, you know, will they or won't they? They will, they have, they did. It's over, you know? And my kids are kind of over me. Like, I am a little bit odd man out at the house right now. And to some degree that my kids are, they're very attached to their dad, which is equally annoying. Like, they're not as annoyed by him as they are by me. And I am finding myself at home, like on an island. And so I'm turning a little bit more to work. But I do see that, like, this period of life as a homemaker is very unfulfilling and not great.
Yeah. And so you have something else that fulfills you outside. Which
I'm
is
lucky to say yes. Yeah.
Right. But I hate to say, like, somebody listening to this is like, well, great, but like I didn't work for the last 15 years. What am I supposed to do? And like this, it's just something else to feel bad about or stress that you don't have in place. It's a source of fulfillment that we're going to talk in the last segment about what different listeners are suggesting, because there's so many good pieces of advice. But it occurs to me, thinking about the responses as a whole, that people are suggesting fulfillment, like finding fulfillment that's just for you. And that might be a job, and it might be running a marathon, and it might be crocheting, and it might be I'm going to read every book that Mark Twain ever wrote, whatever. It's something that you want to do that's just for you, that isn't in service of making you a better servant to other people, but it's just for you. That's going to get you through when you start to feel like, what is all this even for?
I do think that's true. And I'm not saying, like, because I have a job, I'm fully fulfilled and that stuff doesn't bother me. Like, it does. And it's hard. And I get it.
So I think, like, you're at this point in your life and you're like, you know, what fulfills me and what is all this for? And, you know, you start to think about what you haven't accomplished, what isn't on the big board instead of what is. Right?
Yeah.
And it's at these times that you have a choice, right? Like, what can you add?
Mm-hmm.
What can you take away? What can you replace? And to try to reframe it for yourself as a moment of opportunity rather than a, like, well, things only come off the board from here on out.
Oh, I think that's so good. And you say that all the time. What can I add and what can I take away? And I think for me right now, my board is what can I take away? Like, that's just the season that I happen to be in right now. I'm a little overdoing it, and I'm probably giving my family a little bit short shrift. And I have to watch it because my family is also kind of annoying right now. And so I have to watch being like, I can take everything away from those.
Right, I've been there. It's like, all right, I'll see you all
I'm
later.
out, people.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I definitely don't
like
want to respond to my children being in an annoying teen phase by being like, I guess I'll spend time at my job with Amy, my real friend who likes me. You know, like, that's not great. So I have to watch that. But yeah, I think adding sometimes, and I think it sounds a little twee sometimes, which is like, get a volunteer position. It's like, oh,
Right.
Shut up. Like, I don't want a volunteer position. My whole life is meaningless and dead.
Right.
But I do think that fulfillment can look like a lot of different things. And I think fulfillment sometimes for me, I have to remember that, like, reading a novel that I enjoy is fulfilling. Like, it's not, fulfillment doesn't mean winning the Oscar, you know, fulfilling doesn't mean like getting my bikini body back at 50. Like, but going to the gym can feel fulfilling.
Yes.
And putting myself first and reading a novel and, like, getting outside for 20 minutes a day. Like, I think sometimes the fulfillment goal feels like start a foundation that solves hunger in your town. Like, no, that's not it.
Right. This isn't an invitation towards, like, hacking yourself and self-improvement and fixing all your shortcomings. Right.
I think it's like fulfillment is really just like making as much better, not even making as much, making a few things better is fulfillment. Fulfillment isn't like changing the world.
Okay.
All right. I want to hear more solutions when we get back, Amy.
We have solutions.
Amy, we need some solutions. I don't feel like fulfillment. I think we got to drill down on that as a solution.
Our listeners on our Facebook page, which you probably already are on our Facebook page, but if you're not, facebook.com/groups/whatfreshhellcast, listeners can speak to one another. It is a wonderful place to be. And this listener who talked about turning 40 and having this midlife crisis got fantastic advice from other listeners. We have a selection to share for you. Christina said this. It's what we were saying before, but it's better. She says,
I love that, Christina.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
She says, this is an opportunity to stop getting bogged down by past expectations or goals that were never really mine. My life looks nothing like I expected it would, or what others might see as a standard success of achievement, but it works for me every day.
Oh, this is huge. I know someone who recently went to the college reunion of a very, very famous and fancy university. And they were remarking that it does seem like the people who are happy are the people who are not trying to show you how happy they are and how successful they are. And that there are people who have achieved incredible things, partly probably by attending this extremely high profile and fancy named university. And that there are people who have not or have and are not talking about it, but that happiness and big ticket achievement do not seem to necessarily lay on the same strand.
Yeah.
And I think that if people understood that more, they would be much happier. And I do think that, like, you're only a mom. Like, I know a lot of people who have attended these fancy
I was just
places
being at their reunion and what do you do?
Oh, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're a mom. Like,
my kids.
I guess I'll pat you on the head and go talk
Right,
to the
you
person
go
who
there.
is the fancy oligarch of fanciness over here. And it's like, no. And I think, as boring and trite as it sounds, the idea that happiness lies in a magic box in a field somewhere that you unlock by getting fancy jobs or making fancy amounts of money, I hate to tell you, this is not true. Because it would be easier if it was. Like, if you
Right.
could, like, run the race, get first place, and unlock the box of happiness as a result, like, I would be like, go start training, run as fast as you can. But sadly, the box in the woods does not exist.
The goals, others' expectations. This reminds me of the conversation I had with Rainsford Stauffer about her book about ambition. Just that ambition, when you're chasing goals that somebody else said were things you should care about, whether it's like perfect attendance or like passing the bar, right? These are, you need to discern, like, are these things I want, or are these things I think I'm supposed to want, or somebody else told me to want? That maybe the midlife crisis is a time to say. Brene Brown has some amazing quote about midlife is when the universe grabs you by the shoulders and whispers in your ear, I'm not messing around. This is it. And that can, I don't know, that sounds kind of scary as an invitation, but it is an opportunity to be like, take that stuff off the board. You never wanted to do it anyway. So stop worrying that you didn't do it.
Right. And, like, let the countdown work in your favor a little bit. Like, the runway is getting shorter. Like, what do you want to do?
Right.
What do you want to...
Get really intentional.
But what do you want to do has to be realistic. So, like, what do I want to do? One of my favorite books in the world is about Zelda Fitzgerald. I think it's just called Zelda. And it's this fascinating study of this very passionate woman. But she becomes obsessed with becoming a prima ballerina in, like, her 30s maybe, and it's kind of a portrait of madness. Like, you're not going to become, and she works like crazy at it, and she becomes obsessed with it, and, like, you gotta align the goal with some realities. Like, I don't know, bikini model is probably not although they just put Martha Stewart on the cover of Sports
Right.
Illustrated. She's 80, so maybe my modeling career is going to take off.
Maybe.
But I do think that it can sound kind of twee to be like, oh, just find your own happiness. It was inside of you all along, Dorothy. And listen, I do still occasionally see things in entertainment with, nemesis of my past doing extremely well. And I'm not going to say that I'm like, but I have the happiness of a
Right.
loving
Are they
home.
happy?
Like,
Are they
I do
happy?
feel the stabbing feeling in my eyes, and it hurts me. Like,
Right.
I'm not like, well, my box of happiness is at the home and hearth, so I worry not. Like, of course, I'm like, that seems like happiness to
what
me.
if?
Like,
Right,
winning
right.
the Oscar does seem like happiness to me, and I'm annoyed that
Well,
that happened for someone who is not me, who I used to know.
Joni says for her midlife crisis, she got a tattoo and started CrossFit.
Yes, please.
She stopped dying on the mom's sword of martyrdom and started doing more things I wanted to do, says Joni. I like that.
Yeah, I like putting yourself at the center of the story. And I warn you, I am the hag of childhood future, possibly. I do think that this time of the kids turning on you and then eventually leaving is coming, and that you best start focusing on yourself at some point, whether that is taking up needlepoint or whether it is doing CrossFit or whether it is getting tattoos or whether it is going and getting a degree and starting a new profession. That if your spouse and children are an extremely significant portion of your source of happiness, it's putting a lot of pressure on something that is changing, and that maybe you don't have enough tent poles in the ground.
Laurence Steinberg says in his book, it was such a sad, good point about like when adolescents reach adolescent, they quite appropriately, as you have said earlier in this episode, want to be with you less. You know, reject you, push you away.
It's appropriate.
It's appropriate. They start valuing their peers more than their parents. And he has some turn of phrase like, unfortunately, this need is not at all matched by a similar need in the parent. So the parent's needs for connection stay the same, and the adolescent's need for connection completely change. That's
And
hard.
another thing I would point out is that they still need connection, but they don't want to need it. And so it manifests sometimes in like, you must stink, and that's why I don't want to be connected with you. And so it's not even like a pure, like, fly, little birdie, and I will sit here in my proudness and watch you go. It's like, my bird is pooping all over the nest and biting me often.
And yelling, I never liked you anyway.
And
as it
yelling
flies away.
everything you believe is dumb as it flies away, and like flipping you off. Like, it's not a wonderful, magical time.
Right.
And so I do think that it is important to, it doesn't mean you have to start a foundation. It doesn't mean you need to like take up an opera career that left you as a young person. Listen, I had Hollywood dreams. I was Tina Fey in my own mind, and I was not Tina Fey in anyone else's mind. And I realized that like that ship has sailed. No one's looking for the midlife lady to come along and be like, I'm going to write a comedy show. I mean, I probably could have done it, and maybe I could have been successful. I didn't see the path back, and I started a different path, which I'm very happy to be on now.
I was going to say, literally nobody listening would be like, oh, well, at least you didn't, like, here's a comedian who never found an audience. You found an audience. You just stopped chasing this one very limited path that was only available to one or two people, and Tina Fey kind of grabbed the spot.
Took my spot.
For both of us.
Took both of our spots, as it turns out. Yeah, and as you said, I don't want to be like, so start a comedy podcast, because that's what we did. Like, we have also found some pretty rare ground and rare air here, and we can't discount that. But I will say, in another segment of my life, I'm a teacher, and it has given me as much fulfillment, no offense, Amy, as working on the podcast and having this job. It doesn't pay any money. So, you know, without another job, I would be financially in a very different position. But I really think I speak from experience when I say this small, not very recognized teaching job changed the course of my life as an adult. And I think that it doesn't have to be big and fancy. You don't have to be famous from it. Like,
you don't have to be times 100 most interesting people, right?
You don't. None of us are 100 most interesting people. We're not even like our friends' most interesting people. It's fine. Like, hopefully we're someone's most interesting people, but I do think when in doubt, like, find a passion. And I would say, although it's a little bit corny, when in doubt, try to help other people. because I do think that that is very fulfilling.
Stephanie says she went through a midlife crisis at 35, and she started something that has really helped her several years later. She made a year of list. She says, it's things I want to accomplish each year, and then I do them. It's not a New Year's resolution thing. It's just a stuff I want to do this year. Stuff like community service hours, she put that on the top of her own list. Reading a certain number of new books, learning a new skill, something adventurous. It helps me feel like I'm accomplishing things and experiencing life, even as I continue the day-to-day slog. I'm 41 now, and this has helped me quite a bit.
Oh, I love that. Is poster worthy advice. That is live, laugh, love on the wall level advice. That is really, really smart.
You know, I'm going to make a note of this in December. Let's do a year of episode, and I want to hear your list for 2024.
I would love to.
Thanks for that amazing idea, Stephanie. Lillian says finding a job outside of her home has been life-changing, and this was recent. She says, it caused some growing pains and anger. My husband didn't really understand why I needed something other than being his wife and their mother, especially since we are financially set. But it wasn't that I wanted them less. I just wanted something in addition. So I went out and I got it.
I have a friend who's like driving a bus around town. She's driving a huge bus. And I'm like, it's so cool. Why is it so cool? You know how to drive a bus. It's just stretching your capabilities and figuring out what's next.
I had a friend who moved to London with her family for a while and for her spouse's job, and the kids were in school, and she got a job at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Because she wanted to. Like, I'm bored. I'm going to go like hang out at Starbucks for like 10 hours a week and meet people. And
meet people.
Zero regrets. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we need another episode on this, like what's next, and like digging into even more of this advice, because
all right.
I had so much to say about my own midlife that we didn't get to enough of the advice.
But I have to end with Clarice's advice because
yes,
this is a big one. Clarice says, just as children go through phases, we adults do the same thing. Trust me. 40s are okay. 50s are better, etc. Enjoy and appreciate every day. I'm heading for 90, and I wake up grateful each day for what I have left.
I love it.
Put that in a bottle. Thank you, Clarice.
Clarice, you really got us through this one. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We solved it. Clarice solved it.
Yeah, exactly. No more midlife crises. We solved it. Hellions, have you signed up for our newsletter? If you go to our website, whatfishellpodcast.com, or you click the link in the show notes for this episode, you can see this month's newsletter where we're talking about the stuff we're reading, the stuff we're watching, the stuff we're cooking, even more fun stuff that we don't talk about in these episodes. And we would love to include you. So sign up.
And with that, thanks so much for listening. And we will talk to you next time.
So long.